decided we'd start, instead of using bespoke, specific software to do applications, we thought, okay, let's try this concept of workflows. We already had this database. It's called EB, but it was a relational database that, interestingly enough, we had for configuration management, for change control. And we put our asset inventory in there, and we thought, okay, well, let's use this one. It is called EB. And interestingly enough, Bentley, they came along and bought it, which was quite good news for us, because they could then build connectors and bits of plumbing between the databases. But we use things like Esri for our GIS, and so we use a variety of different bits of software. I hate software actually, but although I tend to think we have IT on one side and us as information managers on the other. But the software, and you get things like SAP, which we use a lot, and probably everybody does, and things like Primavera for scheduling, but those programs are absolutely hideous for trying to go under the bonnet and join them up with lots of other things. So we have to go off into a world of data warehousing, sort of scraping a bit of data off every night, and then going into another piece of software and trying to join up apples and pears and bananas to make some sense about what's going on across, so we've got things like, if you can imagine, our scheduling software and our risk software are great pieces of individual software, market leaders, but they're absolutely impossible to try and join them together. And it's this world of software that's inhibiting project managers from actually working best, so you have to think of ways around them. So we go into a data warehouse where we use a thing called Crystal, and that just sort of joins up different types of information stuff in a way which managers can then use.
Well, 2 more questions. Okay,
yeah.
When Rob was doing this presentation earlier on, the question was asked about lessons learned.
Oh, yeah.
And whether there was any form of knowledge management system in place to manage that.
Yeah.
What do you see as some of the difficulties or practicalities of implementing a formal system?
It was really interesting. I was at a meeting with Crossrail Line 2 last week, and we were just talking about, and they were saying, we were just talking about, one of the things that they were doing is that you've got some, they're just starting out Crossrail Line 2. So they've got a risk manager, and they've got people beginning to line up to stand behind doing all of these different activities. And so the risk manager wants to buy the same software that we've got for risk, and you've got all of these people wanting to, where I'm going with this, is that we turned around to them and said, the last thing you should do is buy software. You need to really, we could have benefited a lot more in Crossrail if we'd stood back and said, and worked out what our information requirements really were for the project, and what's the sort of fundamental DNA pieces of information that are going to drive our project, and then think about what type of processes and systems we would then bring in to suit those information needs, rather than to turn around and say, oh, I've got to do some stakeholder management, so I'm going to need some stakeholder management software. I'm going to do HR, so I'm going to need some HR software. I'm going to do some contract administration software, activities, so I need some software. Interesting enough, across each of those 3 different pieces of software is a sort of common denominator of people, contracts, locations, and things like that. So if we had stood back, and Line 2 are going to stand back and say, what are our key information drivers, you'll end up with a completely different suite of software. So the biggest lesson for me in that knowledge information world is really understanding what your information drivers are.
Do you think it's possible to have a generic system across the project so lessons can be shared and actually learned?
It's really hard. It's really hard. I'd love to say yes, but I think it's really hard to get people to do that. I think because you do get, it's a leadership issue. I think if you can get the right, it is a culture thing. If you can get the leadership at the top, we've been very lucky in Crossrail to have, from an information point of view, chief exec who gets it. If you can get the leadership to support and drive that, you can make it happen. But it won't happen bottom up. I don't think, because the people have an innate tendency to, from a behavioural point of view, to go siloed.
One more question, unfortunately.
I want to give a quick thank you very much for your presentation. You have kind of highlighted how there are two aspects to what you do, in my perspective. One is an information science perspective, and one is actually a development, software development side of maybe customization. I wonder how Crossrail managed to have an internal team to deal with these two different aspects, and what is the proportion of...
Yeah, understood. Yeah, I think I understand. It's a really interesting question in a number of ways. One is that the cost of software, for example, across the project is actually quite small. We have a sort of nearly £15 million project. You know, in total, we may have spent, through everybody, it could be, in Crossrail terms, for our technical information, we've probably only spent, sort of £13 million. So all of the systems that we're using for moving into operation and maintenance probably only cost us a few tens of millions, which is peanuts on the size of the scale of the problem and the value that you can get if you do it right. Hopefully there's nobody from TfL here, because actually one of the reasons we could get away with doing this in our project was two reasons really. One was because we were a standalone project. We didn't have the problems of asking TfL. If we'd gone to Transport for London or any of the other organisations and said, could we have permission to do what we did, all this database workflow stuff, they'd have said no, or they'd have said, we need to have a committee and think about it. And so for us, it was just a question of looking at it and I call it information engineering really, and looking at it and saying, well, it's modern technology, let's use it to its hilt. Although even my database people tell me it's very old technology that we're just using in construction. I think that, so getting it to happen, you have to persuade your finance director, so you need to put a business case. And because the benefits, so for example, getting rid of lots of software and just using workflows in the database just made huge sense, particularly to a Welsh finance director who wasn't apt to give away much money. It just made good business sense. So you need to prove the business case, which again can be quite hard, but that's what our job is really.
Okay, I'd just like to extend our thank you.
Favourite time.
No, at all. Thank you very much, Malcolm. And if you'd just like to share your experience. Okay, yet another topic close to our heart, and a lot of you have done this or are doing this for possibly your dissertation as well, and that is sustainability. So I'm going to pass over to Mike now, who's going to talk to you about sustainability.
I think it's okay.
Are you okay?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear me at the back without the microphone? Or yeah? Is that okay for not to use it? Now, you might have noticed I took my jacket off before coming out because I didn't want to be associated with one of the grey-haired people in suits who don't like change. Yes, Malcolm's pointed out he's great as well. I work in the world of sustainability, and really it is very much about change, so I very much embrace it, and I hope that I can demonstrate some of that change, and a lot of it is behaviour and cultural that we're trying to address in the industry. So this is me, Mike Silver. I work for a company called Bechtel, and I've been the sustainability manager on Crossrail now for about 6.5 years, and it's been an absolutely fantastic and fascinating job. Just kind of going back to some of the basics, really important, we talked about, or Malcolm mentioned about, a CEO who gets it. Very important that these things are driven top down. And we were very fortunate that back in about 2008, 2009, the leadership at the time recognised the importance of having a strategy that supported what we wanted to do in the world of sustainability. And we looked back at some of the kind of the UK government themes and our stakeholder, our sponsor themes. So that was the Department for Transport and also Transport for London as the sponsors. And they defined it in a couple of different ways, but and the terminology is there, sort of different, different boxes, but basically showing what the different themes were. Now we took that and then we looked at what we believed was material to the Crossrail project. So these are things that really do have impacts in terms of Crossrail. Remember, impacts can be both positive and negative. And we define that in 7 themes of our own, which are shown there. And within those, we became even more granular and identified specific initiatives around which we want to set key performance indicators and drive particular areas of performance. And those are indicated in those little egg-shaped icons at the bottom. So that was really setting the overall strategy. Now, it's all very well having these things, but you need to basically make sure they're properly integrated into your systems. And this is really what we're trying to demonstrate in this slide, where it's around design, your operating principles, your construction, and so on. All these have to be built in as requirements in some shape or form into the way that you take this forward. Now, where does that start? It starts right at the beginning in terms of your design principles, your specifications. When we go out to tender for our contracts, be they design contracts or construction contracts, again, from pre-qualification stage onwards, make sure that we're actually asking the right questions so that we're weeding out the players in the game who we feel are not capable of actually delivering on this agenda. So it starts at that point, and then working through the tendering process, making sure we get those right requirements in the tender, making sure that we've got good valid responses from the responses in terms of that evaluation. So we're doing that selection and making sure that we've got the right people doing the design, doing the construction. Doesn't solve all of your problems, and it doesn't mean to say that everything is dealt with, but at least you've got a certain amount of pre-selection there, which is very important. And again, it's very much a whole life issue as well. So it's about making sure these things are embedded into the operation and maintenance. Malcolm mentioned about the importance of O&M information. It's important to actually capture that as well in terms of sustainability, and we're looking at how we build in some of this information into the data management system that Malcolm is leading on. And right through to deconstruction and decommissioning as well, as I say, this sort of whole life, cradle to cradle sort of approach that we're now looking at in the industry. Just to kind of break this down a little bit, if we look at primarily at the environmental sustainability aspects, we looked at, how can we provide a consistent methodology in terms of the way that we evaluate our designs. And we looked at 2 schemes, SQL and BREEAM, which you may or may not be familiar with. SQL is a scheme developed for civil engineering projects, stands for Civil Engineering Environmental Quality. And we are evaluating what we call our traditional civil structures, tunnels, portals and shafts, using that methodology. And we are using BREEAM, the Building Research Assessment, Environmental Assessment methodology, for our station structures. Again, there was a bit of a debate. Is a station, and these are underground stations primarily, is a station a civil asset, is it a building? And, one could argue it both ways, but we decided to go for BREEAM, and in fact I think that was a very good decision. It's been a very sort of reiterative process because nobody had actually used BREEAM in an underground station environment, so we've learned a lot as we've gone along, as have the BRE. So we've, as I say, it's been a reiterative process to make sure that the credits that we're using, the criteria that we're using to assess this are appropriate for what we're doing. But I think at the end of the day, it has helped to drive a better result. So I think that was a good decision that we made back in about 2009. Just a little sort of summary of what we cover in these different schemes. I mean, this is looking at SQL, and these are the broad subject areas that are covered. So as you can see, it's fairly comprehensive, but typically weighted for environmental performance. There are some sort of social criteria effective neighbours, relationships with local community and stakeholders, etc. There are aspects of responsible procurement that are also embedded in one or two of these credits, like the materials credits and so on, but primarily an environmentally focused methodology. Also, in terms of the balance of credits, you can obtain a client and interim design and a whole project award at the end of the project. And again, if you look at the breakdown of those credits, I would say about 2/3 of them are a little bit more construction focused, with the other third being more design and operation focused. And I make that point because it's an interesting contrast really with BREEAM. Again, if you look at the basic subject areas, again there you'll see maybe the terminology that is used is slightly different, but basically we're covering not a dissimilar set of issues. But again, as I say, the difference with this is that BREEAM tends to be more design focused. The majority of the credits are for the design and operation of the building, and there's a small subset of credits which are regarding management of the construction activities. Just to, again, focusing on one or two of the areas that we've been looking at, energy efficiency has been a very key one for us. As you can imagine, an operational railway, very energy hungry. The station assets really account for about 15% of the overall energy footprint of the operational railway, the other 85% being in the rolling stock. And we'll come on to some of the things we've looked at in the rolling stock. But in terms of the stations, we've looked very much at trying to see how we can reduce the energy consumption in the stations. Quite difficult, as you can imagine. We're several basement layers down, we need lots of ventilation, we need lots of light, we need methods of being able to get people between those floors, so escalators, lifts, we can't operate without those. So the focus has been very much on seeing how we can actually produce through specification, through good design, reducing the energy consumption. Here's an example at Paddington Station. Again, we're about 1.5 sort of basement levels down here. We've got a bit of natural light coming in there, so again that obviously tends to, it will help to reduce the lighting requirement. Also good in terms of the well-being factor as well in using these sorts of spaces. So there was one slide that I've just taken out from the pack actually to condense it, but I mentioned lifts and escalators as well. Again, as I say, obviously we can't operate the stations without them, but we have specified lifts and escalators. The lifts have regenerative braking, for example. The escalators have variable speed drives. So again, they're able to detect the loading on the escalator and sort of crank up the motor or more or less depending on the actual usage of the escalator. They're called heavy-duty metro escalators. That actually sound like they're bad news, but actually they're far more energy efficient than the current legacy assets within the London Underground system. Probably about 28% more efficient. And this is part of the PAN Transport for London contract. So we get the immediate benefit of those on the Crossrail stations, but as the London Underground assets are updated, they will also draw from this contract and have a similar specification of lift. So it's quite a wide-reaching opportunity. Example here of our station at Bond Street. The station entrance is at street level, everything else is really below street level. But what I also wanted to illustrate with this is that it's a great opportunity not just to think of these things in terms of, right, we're building a transport asset that will get people from location A to location B. It's also a catalyst for some fantastic improvement in our urban realm. And this one is, again, quite a good example of that. We have here, if you can see it here, on that corner, a listed Georgian building. This would have been an old sort of Georgian town square. In the 1970s, buildings were demolished, and some 1970s sort of office blocks arose in their place. You can see the demolition there, and here's an artist's impression of what the finished station will look like with its oversight development. Very much more in keeping with the original character of that square. And we've also taken the opportunity to improve the urban realm around it and make the street space much more pedestrian friendly, cyclist friendly, and get a much better use of that shared space rather than a very car orientated environment that you can see there. So fantastic catalyst for these urban improvements as well. Again, another example of urban realm improvement. This is at Tottenham Court Road station looking towards Soho Square. I mentioned well-being as well, and this is another kind of key thing in terms of what we're trying to actually, as part of our health and well-being theme. It's not only about health and well-being of construction workers and health and safety of construction workers, but we're also looking at this in terms of the actual finished asset. Very spacious, open areas, which help with the flow of people, gets rid of that sort of feeling of claustrophobia. Obviously, there's a degree of future-proofing of this as well in terms of size to deal with the passenger numbers that we're forecast to have in the future. A lot of thought has gone into the signage, the signposting. We have these totems to signpost people to not just around the station, but to points of interest and transport interchanges around the station. So we have a much better integrated transport network. So again, a lot of thought has gone into that internal space. Another aspect that sort of ties into this is our art programme, and that's been another key initiative to make the stations sort of almost destinations in their own right, and again helping with that feeling of well-being and so on. We've been looking for funding for the art programme over the last few years, and we've managed to get funding for most of our stations now. A couple of examples here of the artwork at Canary Wharf Station, and this one at Paddington Station. So these are fully funded now and are going ahead. We've also had a good look at the sustainability of our materials, and we have a thing called the Common Architectural Specification. The principle behind that is that each architect should be able to interpret the stations and the design in their own way, but we still want a common theme. So externally, the stations have to be in keeping with the area that we're in, so obviously that's controlled very much by the planning framework. Inside, what we want is some individuality, but when you get to a certain point, we want people to feel that they're part of the Crossrail experience, and there's a sort of seamlessness in design that they know that they're on Crossrail. So we created this common architectural specification. When we did this and we identified the materials that we were going to use, we also went through a kind of a grading system to look at the environmental impacts of these materials, a fairly high-level life cycle assessment in essence, looking at some of the key impacts, and then using a red, amber, green system to actually flag up the materials that we wanted to encourage our architects and designers to use. So basically, it was about prioritising ones which are coded green, under certain circumstances, and this can quite often be due to issues of sort of durability or security reasons in terms of the way those materials might perform. They might be able to go for amber, but under those circumstances, should they be selecting materials which were coded as red. I mentioned our rolling stock earlier, and again, I mean, one of the fundamental problems we have with these, we've got trains which are 200 odd metres long. Safety standards over the years have generally resulted in train weights increasing. What we have managed to do with Crossrail is to reverse that trend. It doesn't mean to say that we've got lightweight trains, and there's an important consideration there as well. If you look at the Japanese railways, an average Japanese train carriage is about half the weight of a UK one, and that is basically because of safety. The principle behind that is that they design on the basis that their trains don't crash. So, but we actually build in a safety factor on the basis that if it does crash, it's going to be able to deal with that impact. So there's an impact on weight. Furthermore, people are increasingly wanting climate control, comfort control on the trains. So we have a lot of additional kit that needs to go on there to provide that comfort cooling, the air conditioning on the trains. But what we have done, as I say, is managed to reverse the trend. We put in a target weight in the train manufacturing contract, and there was a cost penalty if the manufacturer went above that target weight. So we managed to put in a lot of extra features, but as I say, try to contain that weight. The trains have regenerative braking, so that's putting energy back into the system that can be picked up by other trains in the vicinity. We have a driver advisory system as well, and this looks at the driving style. so we can get individual driver information on how they drive that train, and again, the theory behind that being, of course, that there can be further driver training if those trains aren't being driven efficiently. And again, something that we've heard about this actually is that there can be sort of union intervention in this, because the unions don't necessarily like individual driver information being made available. So again, I think that's a kind of interesting behavioural thing and cultural thing that we might have to deal with. We can provide the operator with this very valuable information, but whether they can actually use it in reality to influence behaviour will be quite interesting. Now, in the central section under London, the tunnel section, we're actually under automatic train operating, so actually it's fairly hands-off. The drivers don't actually do anything, so that means it's all automated, and we take away that human element, and providing that there's no perturbations to the signalling system, we should be able to run a very efficient service in that central section. 24 trains an hour, with the capability going up to 36 trains an hour. Other features, LED lighting, a lot of focus on what we call our hotel loads in terms of intelligent heating and cooling systems on the train. So very high-tech trains. We've also looked at the typical composition of the rolling stock. Again, the life expectancy of these trains is going to be about 30-35 years. We might have a major refurbishment somewhere during that in that lifetime. Now, when we look at this in terms of recyclability, the majority of the trains are actually steel components, so very easily recyclable. We do have some other minor components. Increasingly, people are looking to use polymer-type materials, which do have benefits. They are lightweight and so on, take up less space, etc. You can make them thinner, but there are some end-of-life impacts associated with these. So although they do have benefits, we do need to think about how we deal with these things at end of life. That's mainly the environmental story. We've touched on a few of these sort of social aspects of the sustainability story as well, in terms of health and safety and well-being improvements to urban rail, again, which can help with that sort of health and well-being factor. Just want to focus a little bit more on those, sort of in terms of economic and those social impacts. In terms of the economic impacts, we've defined this for Crossrail very much around supply chain and what we can do for the supply chain, predominantly in the UK. When you're building a big project like this, and it's in the southeast of London, it's in London, there's a feeling that it's only benefiting a small population, and the rest of the country isn't really getting the benefit from this. So we've had requirements in this to demonstrate in our contracts that the contractors have to demonstrate how they're actually using the wider supply chain around the UK. And we've actually mapped this very carefully, and we've gone down to about 4 or 5 levels, tiers of procurement, so we can see where the contracts actually are procured. And if you look at that as a scatter around the UK, we can see that 2/3 of the contracts are actually outside of London and the southeast. So there is benefit, economic benefit from Crossrail around the country. We've actually, unfortunately I haven't put it on a slide, but always thinking when I'm pointing to it, I'm a bit like the weatherman, because I'm sort of pointing to different parts of the thing, and it's like a heat map really. And you can see the scatter, and there are places like sort of the west, down the West Country, which is perhaps a little bit thin on contracts. Parts of areas like Northern Ireland, Scotland as well, tend to be a little bit lighter, a little bit cooler on those heat maps. But we've actually gone out, we've done road shows. These have been supported at a very high level. The senior management team have gone on those road shows. We've worked with local bodies up there to actually get out there and tell the supply chains about Crossrail, about the opportunities that there are on Crossrail. We've tried to encourage as many small, medium enterprises as we can, and again, about 60% of the companies are classified as SMEs. 96% of the spend, the construction spend on Crossrail, has remained in the UK, and again, that's been a very positive story over the last few years, in this time of sort of recession that we're trying to sort of now gradually climb out of. But although at tier 1 level, a lot of the work might be going to overseas contractors, once you start delving down into those tiers, that supply chain actually remains in the UK. So that's, as I say, a very positive story. Again, there's a a bit of a conflict, if you like, as well, between a London pressure to say, yeah, we want, this is a London project, it's disrupting people in the London boroughs, how do we actually provide opportunities for them on Crossrail? And then you've got this other aspect, as I say, which is, well, no, why are you just benefiting London and the South East? We want to see the benefit as well. I think we've achieved a fairly good balance around that. I mean, certainly around opportunities for employment, trying to get long-term unemployed people, etc., back into employment. Looking at the local boroughs, we've worked with an organisation, Job Centre Plus, with Job Centre Plus to actually provide opportunities for local long-term unemployed people, and the roles normally have to be advertised for about 48 hours locally before they go before they're advertised more nationally. I think at the last count about 64% of the lower skilled jobs were actually secured by that route for local people. But as you go up and you need more skilled people, it becomes a bit more problematic to actually get those skilled people at a local level. But again, we've supplemented that with a big training program. There's a big apprenticeships program. We're well above 500 apprenticeships now on the program. We've funded a tunnelling and underground construction academy. And there have been several thousands